Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are looking at a story that is just absolutely wild when you really think about it. We're going to explore how a relatively small kingdom, literally perched on the very edge of Europe, somehow managed to build this massive global network that completely rewired human history. I mean, it's a fascinating question, isn't it? Usually, when we think of these giant historical empires, our brains go straight to huge, sprawling landmasses and massive terrestrial armies marching across continents. But what if a small kingdom, we're talking barely 1 million people at the time, became the very first major power to build a global maritime empire? It's a total David and Goliath situation. This modest nation managed to cross the Atlantic, sail all the way around Africa, reach India, and set up outposts from South America clear across to Asia. So let's dive into exactly how they pulled this off. Part 1. The Rise of a Maritime Power. You really can't talk about the dawn of this empire without bringing up this guy, Prince Henry the Navigator. He was a major 15th century figure who completely changed the game by crucially backing and funding early navigation. And you have to remember, actively treating exploration as a funded, state-backed enterprise was a genuinely revolutionary idea back then. With his backing, Portuguese sailors started pushing further and further south along the Atlantic coast of Africa. And they weren't just out there wandering aimlessly. They were on a mission, actively hunting for new trade routes, searching for gold, and desperately trying to unlock a direct sea route to those incredibly lucrative Asian markets. And as they pushed south, they actually managed to crack the code of these incredibly complex ocean winds and currents in really rapid succession. Just look at this timeline. In 1488, Bartholomew Diaz hits a massive milestone, becoming the first known European to round the southern tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. Then, boom, 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas is signed, essentially splitting the newly explored areas of the world between Portugal and Spain. And just a couple years after that, Vasco da Gama finishes the journey Diaz started and finally reaches Calicut on India's southwestern coast. For Portugal, and honestly for all of Europe, this was a total game changer. They finally had their direct maritime highway straight to the Indian Ocean. Moving on to part 2, connecting the global oceans. Now, what's really interesting here is the strategy. Traditional empires usually expanded by conquering huge inland territorial land masses, marching armies across borders to grab as much land as possible. But the Portuguese took a completely different approach. Instead of trying to conquer vast inland territories everywhere they landed, they built a highly decentralized maritime-focused network. We're talking heavily fortified coastal forts, strategic ports, and bustling trading posts. The logic was simple. They didn't need to control the entire country. They just needed to control the ports and the sea routes. And that specific strategy allowed their reach to be just incredibly vast. Pretty soon, their presence spanned across Africa, India, Southeast Asia, China, Japan, and Brazil. By relying on this sort of string of coastal pearls, Portugal successfully linked the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and the Asian maritime worlds together in a way nobody had ever really seen before. Which brings us to part 3, the Golden Age. So, going into the 16th century, Portugal is undeniably one of Europe's top maritime powers. Because their ships were controlling those absolutely vital choke points of the Indian Ocean trade network, just an immense amount of wealth started flowing directly back home. Cities like Lisbon were completely transformed practically overnight, blossoming into these incredibly wealthy, vibrant hubs of international commerce. Portugal was officially one of the very first European states to boast a truly global overseas network. But, it wasn't just Asia driving all this wealth. Over across the Atlantic, Brazil was becoming hugely important. Formalized as a Portuguese territory right after that 1494 Treaty of Tordesillas we mentioned, Brazil turned into an absolute powerhouse of production. Its booming exports included enormous natural resources, spices, and highly profitable sugar from massive plantations, which people actually started calling white gold because it was so incredibly lucrative. And eventually, they struck vast amounts of actual gold in the interior too. Because of all this, Brazil quickly grew to be Portugal's single largest and most important overseas territory. Now we have to be clear here. This massive economic engine, all that wealth generated by those plantations and resources, it didn't just happen by magic. It relied heavily on the deeply damaging system of enslaved African labor. That system became a central, foundational, and profoundly destructive component of the entire Portuguese Atlantic Empire. So when we look at this golden age, it's really a dual reality. On one side of the coin, you have this unprecedented cultural and economic exchange. You've got spices, textiles, and precious metals circling the globe, along with the spread of new global food traditions, architectural styles, and the spread of Christianity by missionaries. But on the exact same token, these exchanges were happening right alongside intense colonial exploitation and conflict. This era was simultaneously defined by warfare, forced religious conversion in several regions, the severe disruption of indigenous societies, and strict colonial domination. All right, moving into part 4, rivals and imperial decline. Because, of course, a golden age can't last forever. This decline was essentially a cascading sequence of events that played out over centuries. Let's trace how this builds. Step 1. New competitors hit the scene. The Dutch, English, and French start entering the Asian and Atlantic trade routes, directly challenging Portugal's dominance. Step 2. In 1580, Portugal enters a dynastic union with Spain. That meant both kingdoms fell under the same monarch until 1640, which temporarily shifted Portugal's focus and resources. Step 3. Fast forward to 1822, and Portugal takes a massive economic hit when Brazil, its most valuable territory, declares independence. And finally, Step 4 brings us all the way into the 20th century, where global decolonization movements finalize the empire's dissolution. And a huge reason for this steady decline honestly just came down to geography and logistics. The very same strategy that made them so successful in the beginning, that decentralized network of coastal forts, actually became their Achilles heel. The empire's enormous distance from Portugal made it incredibly difficult and literally incredibly expensive to defend. When newer, stronger commercial powers like Britain, France, and the Netherlands showed up, Portugal just couldn't protect its stretched out, highly dispersed maritime borders. And that brings us to our final chapter, a complex modern legacy. The definitive end of the Portuguese Empire actually happened relatively recently, in the late 20th century. In 1974, political change back home sparked the Carnation Revolution, which ended Portugal's authoritarian regime and rapidly sped up decolonization. Just a year later, in 1975, major African territories like Angola and Mozambique gained their independence, and the final official closure of this imperial era happened in 1999, when Portugal's last major overseas territory, Macau, was transferred to China. But here's the thing, the end of the political empire was definitely not the end of its influence. Today, Portuguese is spoken by literally hundreds of millions of people worldwide, from Brazil to Angola to Mozambique. To put that into perspective, it's a massive, enduring linguistic footprint that shows exactly how deeply this small European kingdom embedded itself across multiple continents. Ultimately, understanding Portugal's place in world history means we have to look objectively at the entirety of what it left behind. We have to view it through the lens of both global cultural heritage, the shared language, the vibrant music, unique architecture, and global food traditions, as well as the very real historical scars, the difficult, lasting legacies of slavery, exploitation, and warfare. Both sides of this ledger are absolutely essential if we want to grasp the full picture of the empire's impact. And that leaves us with this final, really important thought to ponder. How does the shadow of the very first global maritime empires still shape our world today? The sea routes they opened and the continents they connected forever transformed international trade and human interaction. The empire might be gone from our political maps, but its influence is still deeply woven into the fabric of our modern world. If you found this explainer helpful in breaking down this massive span of history, be sure to like and subscribe for more structured deep dives into the rise and fall of the world's greatest empires. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.